trying to record this, and each time this thing kicks out on me. It's very interesting. All right. So we're going to start with letter A, the Pilgrims. When I say Pilgrims, what do you think of?
The Mayflower.
Mayflower, nice. Thanksgiving. Plymouth Rock. What'd you say, Caleb?
Pointy hats.
Pointy hats, okay? Nice buckles. Yeah, okay. So those are all the Pilgrims. They're real people. They came on the Mayflower. They came to Plymouth, landed at Plymouth Rock. And so we're going to learn quickly about them. When we talk about Thanksgiving started off as like great holiday. We love it. And we thought it was just, good times, some Pilgrims and some Native Americans having some food together. Everything's great. Then history kind of went back. It was like, it's not that clean and pretty, and it kind of swung the pendulum to say it's horrible. Thanksgiving's a terrible thing. It's somewhere in the middle. Okay, it was a celebration between the Pilgrims and a Native American tribe. They were celebrating having killed another Native American tribe. Okay, so
Wampanoag.
yes, Wampanoags. Yes, very good. So they had united against their common enemy. So the Pilgrims were there and were kind of struggling, and the Native Americans helped them, and they're like, hey, we've got these enemies who are beating us up. Will you help us defeat them? And they're like, well, you helped us, so yes.
Hey, we've had these atomic bombs.
Yeah, not yet. So it is a celebration of a victory in battle, and it was against another Native American tribe. So not as clean and nice as you'd like it to be, but it was with another Native American tribe that's fighting that Native American tribe. So just a little more complicated, not super smooth, like get together, have some turkey, and give thanks. Okay? So now, to explain how we get here, we're going to start with a couple kings. So James the First we're going to talk about, and he was the king of England. And if we go back to the religious setting in England, they had a church called the Anglican Church,
Yes.
also known as the Church of England. Same thing.
Isn't that like a thing in Australia now? Like it's less in England and not much in the
Yeah, there's more Anglicans in Africa than there are in England, actually, which is surprising. So I don't know about numbers in Australia,
Yeah, in Australia.
but I guess it'd be the same because they were a British colony. So the way we got here was all the way back, King Henry VIII. He was king of England. He had a wife who didn't give him a son, so he wanted to divorce her, but the Pope said no. And so he said, well, if I was the head of the church, I'd grant a divorce. So he made himself head of the church and created the Anglican Church. So that's how we get the Anglican Church. He looked around, he saw these other Protestant churches and said, why can't I do that? So James the First steps in, and he's king now. But as king, he's also head of the Anglican Church. So in his mind, if you oppose the Anglican Church, you're opposing the king. So he had a program of no religious toleration, no religious freedom. If you're in England, you have to be Anglican, and if you're not, we're going to persecute you. You got to stand this, because otherwise you're opposing the king. So within the Anglican Church, it was still very much, and for a lot of Protestants, way too close to the Roman Catholic Church. And so there are these groups called separatists. Now, we did our activity, and how many of you guys at the college church we talked about wanted to start your own church? I forget.
Oh no, I didn't.
Was it just Nathan? Is there anyone else?
Did I? Yeah, I did.
Okay, so you guys are the Pilgrims. Pilgrims are in the Anglican Church, but they're like, there's no hope for them. We need to start our own church. So they call themselves separatists, or they got labeled separatists. And this group of separatists began in England, but then when King James started getting a little ruthless, they took off and headed out to Holland. So England was no longer safe for them. They take their people and go to Holland, and they live there for about 10 to 15 years until King James allows a company called the London Company to start this colony in Virginia. As a company, they need people willing to go, be colonists, found this colony. And so the Pilgrims hear about this, and they're like, well, that's a place we could practice our own church. We could create our own church. And so they hop aboard the Mayflower and head over.
So
Now,
those were the separatists?
yes.
Okay.
So on this Mayflower is about 100 people plus the crew. Of the 100 people, only 33 were Pilgrims, were separatists. a very small group. They're supposed to go to Virginia, they get blown off course, they land up in Massachusetts, winter's coming, and they decide they're just gonna stay there. They try to settle, winter's pretty brutal in New England, and half of them die. By the time spring rolls around and the boat heads back, only 50 are alive, but they all choose to stay. So, one of the first colonies, early colonies, are these Pilgrims. They are separatists. They did come on the Mayflower. And they came basically for religious freedom. They wanted their own church. The next group we'll talk about is everyone else in this room who decided, no, I'm staying in the church. I'm going to try to fix the church from within. Those are called the Puritans. So we got a new king. Now we got Charles the First. And he's looking at expanding the colonies. Virginia's doing somewhat well. It's getting off its feet. It's got tobacco now. It's growing. And so he wants to start a colony in Massachusetts. The Pilgrims are already there. And so he creates another company in the Massachusetts Bay Colony and is looking for people to go. However, like his predecessor, James, he too does not practice religious freedom. You have to be Puritan. And so there's a man who is part of the Puritan movement, who is committed to reforming the church from within. So these are the Puritans. These are everybody in our scenario who's like, no, I'm staying in the church, try and fix the church. I don't want to leave that authority. And these are the Puritans. They want to reform it from within. Yeah.
Charles the First forced people to be Anglican, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just like James did.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So the king, again, in his mindset, since I'm the head of the church and the head of the country, if you're starting another church, you're rebelling against me. So we get a guy named John Winthrop, who is a Puritan, and he sees kind of the writing on the wall with Charles the First. He sees that the separatists had to flee, and he's thinking, this isn't such a bad idea to go to the colonies. I think persecution could be coming. And so he starts getting together a group of people when he hears about this Massachusetts Bay Colony to head to this colony. And he's going to get it pretty well organized. 11 ships, 1,000 people. So as the Pilgrims only had 100 and half of them die, Winthrop organizes 1,000 people on 11 different ships to head on over, and almost all of them Puritans. So here's the religious motivation of the Puritans. And this is interesting because they wanted to reform the church from within, and yet they're leaving the country. And that's because they thought persecution was coming. Winthrop especially. Now you'd think possibly in coming over that they were going to have religious freedom because they were denied it, but they did not. When they created the Massachusetts Bay Colony, there was no religious freedom. You had to be Puritan. If you're going to come to their colony, you got to be willing to become a Puritan, submit to the Puritan church. And this is what's interesting about England. England used its colonies for people they didn't want. Okay? So they don't like you, go start a colony. Whereas Spain, France, if they didn't like you, they didn't want you in their country or in their colonies. England's kind of like, well, we'll just use you to start a colony and make profit off of you. So they're okay with it, and the king's okay with it. So John Winthrop heads out there with 1,000 people, sets up this Puritan, basically holy land for people to come to. And then just like he thought, King Charles does start to persecute the Puritan church. And this leads to what historians call the Great Migration. So initially, when Winthrop showed up, he showed up with 1,000 people, and they built the city of Boston. They've been losing baseball games ever since. And then within 15 years, 20,000 more will come in just over 10 to 15 years. Almost 2,000 Puritans a year are coming because Charles I is persecuting them in England. If you're a Puritan, you can be killed for your faith. Definitely imprisoned, probably killed. And so we get this massive migration over. Yeah.
So the people who were Puritan and didn't allow religious freedom, that means that they, did that mean they tried to kill the people who were Anglican?
Yes.
So they were,
Now-
outlaws.
Now it's a little bit different because they are still in their minds Anglican, but they're trying to purify it. So not so much Anglican, but if you were separatist, if you were Catholic,
Do you know what like the whole pure part, the Puritan motto is? Like, is it like, oh, separation of the church from the hierarchy of the king?
here's how they would say it, okay? In terms of, like, what they disagreed with, they felt the Anglican Church was much too Roman Catholic.
Okay.
So, for an example, they would say, if the Bible doesn't, let me say it right. If the Bible doesn't say you should do it, don't do it. The Anglicans would say, if the Bible doesn't say not to do it, go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
So it's a little confusing. I use the example of, like, if you're home with your brother and sister and mom and dad go out, the Anglican, well, let's start with the Puritan. The Puritan sibling would say, hey, mom and dad said we can't have any ice cream. Well, they didn't say we could have ice cream, so we're not gonna have ice cream. The Anglican sibling would say, they didn't say we couldn't have ice cream, so let's eat all the ice cream. Does that make sense? So since they said they didn't say we couldn't, we can do it.
Yeah.
So, an example in real life is the Anglican Church had something called the Book of Common Prayer. They put it together, they wanted their church praying it. It was prayers to say with your family in the morning and prayers to say in the evening, and they really liked it, the whole church praying the same thing. The Puritan Church looked at that and said, the Bible never tells us to write out prayers. It tells us to talk to God like He's our dad, so we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be reading prayers, we should be praying to God individually. That's wrong. The Anglican Church says, well, it doesn't say we can't do this, so let's write a bunch of prayers and have people pray together as a church. That's kind of how they differed in it. So in general, the Puritans wanted to stay within the Church of England and fix it. Even though they fled the country, that was still kind of their push. And we'll see that with the next guy, basically, that comes along, the next separatist. The other thing that's really important to understand is, for them, they combine the church and the state. And again, this is kind of, it's even hard, I think, sometimes to wrap our mind around, because we live in a country that separates church and state. But as you read about the Puritans, things like the Scarlet Letter, basically, if you broke a church law, you could be punished by the state. You could be fined. If you didn't go to church on Sunday, you could be fined by the state. If you didn't know certain tenets, certain beliefs, you could be fined. So it's combining it. Okay. So think if Valley Christian was a country, right? Because we make you go to chapel, we make you learn certain things. You know, now you choose to come here, you volunteer to come here. So this not so much, but they kind of viewed it that way. You're choosing to come to our colony. This is what we expect.
If Valley Christian was a monarchy, who would you be on the chessboard, Mr.
I would be a bishop.
That's what I was gonna say.
I'd like that. Move diagonally and take people down.
You and Mr. Anderson.
Appreciate that. So that's the concept here for the Puritan New England. No separation of church and state, and it eventually will become very legalistic because of that. Now, I cut that off with this picture. I do like the Puritans. I like John Winthrop and his ideas. I don't agree with legislating Christianity. I've never seen it work well. He tried it, Calvin tried it, Charlemagne tried it. Whenever you do, it seems like it stifles the spirit. People aren't really believing Christ for themselves, they're believing it because they have to. So here's a quote from him, so you can see like his heart was good, he was in the right spot. He said, "We must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must delight in each other, make others' condition our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together. For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us."
Oh, it's kind of like the verse.
That's the verse, okay? Very good. So the reason I have you learning this verse is because this is the mindset of the Puritans, of a lot of the religious people coming over, the Christians coming over. It was, hey, God has opened this opportunity for us to be a light to the nations, a city on a hill for them to look at. Very much the mindset, especially up in New England. So a lot of Christians will look at America and say, look at our Christian foundation, which is true, okay? This is very, very true. Does become legalistic in many areas. But we have to not forget that in the South, we have the Virginia colony, who was not there for religious reasons. They were there for what? Gold, money, tobacco, okay? They were selling stuff. So kind of, if you really have to look at the foundation of our country, yes, there are people coming here for religious reasons and good ones. There are also people coming here to make money. So probably hasn't changed that much. We have kind of both in our country right now. But you have both as a foundation depending which colony you're in. All right, let's see. Good. Let me tell you about Rhode Island and separatism. First, let's do a little brain break. Quick game of paper, rock, scissors. New rules. Okay? So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go 1, 2, 3, shoot. When you say shoot, you're either going to give a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Here's the rules. High number wins unless you're 3 over the other number. Okay? So 5 beats 4, but 5 loses the 2. Okay? Got it? So me and Caleb, okay, so we'll watch, ready?
Is it 3 over?
So I have a 5-2, I have higher, but I'm 3 over, so Caleb wins. Got it?
I think so.
Turn to your person next to you, best of 5. Let's see how you go. And we go for 8 more minutes of lecture. Come on, Trey. Diego back here, Kylie. You guys play. I'll play Trey.
Oh my god.
You win.
How did we roll?
Who's the Ray?
Oh, yeah, you win.
I win.
Wait, no, you didn't.
You win.
I win.
2-2.
You ahead of me.
You win.
Oh, you're
Trey beat me.
Trey, that one that he had 5 and you had 3, you didn't lose because it has to be 3 over, doesn't it?
No, if you're 3 over, then
Yeah,
the guy
if
under
you're 3 over,
wins.
you lose.
So 5 beats 3, but 5
Oh,
loses the 2.
yeah.
All right, who's the winners? Trey beat me.
Trey,
Kylie?
you're gonna have to play Booth or Nathan.
Oh no.
Nathan. What happened, dude?
You don't understand? Choose to learn. Come on. Even paper, rock, scissors. Who won here?
Scissors, rock, paper.
Okay.
It's pronounced.
Did I say it wrong again?
Two,
All right, here we go. Keep going. We got 8 minutes.
Rock to the other side.
Rhode Island and separatism. So we already talked about separatism. Now we're going to tell you another guy. So Pilgrims are separatists, but so is this guy Roger Williams. I love this statue of him because it's so strange to me because it's a statue of Roger Williams, which makes total sense, and then a statue of a woman writing Roger Williams on his statue. Doesn't make sense to me, but there you go. Roger Williams, he comes to the Puritan colony, Massachusetts Bay Colony, as a pastor, but really with separatist thoughts. So as he's here, he's much more of a separatist than he is a Puritan. And so he immediately starts getting in trouble. There we go. So some of his teachings. Right off the bat, he starts teaching in his church, hey, the Anglican Church, we need to not be a part of them. He calls them drunkards. He calls them whores. He's like, they are sinners that we need nothing to do with. Obvious separatist teaching. John Winthrop gets wind of this. He starts kind of dialoguing with him, and Winthrop's position is, yes, the Anglican Church is wrong, but they're weaker brothers that we need to help. So just going back to that scenario again, are you leaving the church and taking people with you, or are you staying in the church trying to fix it from within? That's exactly what's going on right here between Winthrop and Williams. Then Williams challenges the charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He looks around and he says, how did we get this land? What right does the king have to give us this land? It's clearly not his. It was the Native Americans' land.
Oh no, not someone with common sense.
What?
I said not someone with common sense.
Yes, exactly. So that's Roger Williams. So he rolls in and he's like, we should be paying the Indians for this land. We can't just take it from the king. So that starts shaking up the Puritans a little bit. Finally, he does not agree with separation of church and state. He does not agree with church and state together. He thinks it should be separated. So he thinks, let's let the Holy Spirit convict people and have them go to church rather than force them to go to church. So all of this, as he begins preaching, it gets him in a bunch of trouble. Eventually he gets put on trial, and he's found guilty of dangerous opinions and seditious letters.
What?
Okay?
Dangerous opinion.
Dangerous opinion. So I like to bring this up today because in America, could you be put on trial and found guilty of a dangerous opinion?
No.
Yeah, yes, you could.
How?
What?
It could be charged as hate speech or something.
Okay, in a few instances, maybe. If it was hate speech,
but not opinion, like.
not a dangerous, not an opinion. If you said something like, I'm gonna murder the president, yes, you can get in trouble for that. But for the most part, you can have whatever opinion you want, write whatever you want, and with freedom of speech, you're not gonna get convicted.
I mean, you could say like, I disagree, they could disrespectfully say that you disagree with the president or whoever's in charge, and that still wouldn't be.
Yep. Unless you threaten his life, have some credibility there, or threaten to harm somebody, you're not going to be put on trial. He is put on trial, found guilty of dangerous opinions, seditious letters. He's kicked out of the colony, and so he heads a little bit south, and he starts the city of Providence, Rhode Island. So our next colony will be Rhode Island. Significant for a couple reasons. One, he pays the Native Americans for the land. So he goes in, he negotiates, trades with them, and gives them reasonable goods in exchange for the land. Two, he institutes religious freedom. So this will be the first colony in America that has religious freedom, and obviously foreshadowing the future of America where we have freedom of religion. So he allowed pretty much anyone to come to his colony, didn't matter if they were Jewish, he allowed Jews to come, Catholics to come, Quakers to come, all could come to his colony. And that's Rhode Island. All right, I'm going to tell you about a couple more colonies, some of them significant, others less significant, so I've really shortened what you have to know about them. First, Connecticut, not overly significant. I'll just tell you, it was started by a guy named Thomas Hooker, unfortunate name, leaves the Massachusetts Bay Colony and just decides he's going to move west and starts the colony of Connecticut. But that's all I'm going to say about that. Then we have a group of proprietary colonies. So far, the ones we've talked about in Virginia and Massachusetts Bay have all been founded by companies endorsed by the king. So there are times when the king would find a company and be like, start a colony for me, make me some money, and so a company would start it. However, there's several colonies that are proprietorships, and what that means is the king gave the land to a person or a group of people, kind of like the feudal system. Like you'd have a count in charge of a county. That's basically what he's doing, a prince instead of principality. And so he'll give it to one person or a few others to run the colony for him.
Would you say that Hooker left? Like what?
He left Massachusetts and went west and established Connecticut. So the first one we'll talk about is Maryland. It's given to a guy named Lord Baltimore. So obviously the city of Baltimore is what he founds in Maryland. It was given as a religious retreat, religious safe haven for what? What group of Christians do you think? Maryland.
What's it called?
Maryland.
Is it like
The Aryan Christians?
No. What type of Christians revere the Virgin Mary?
Catholics.
Catholics, okay?
Oh.
So you couldn't be Roman Catholic in England, but the king's like, Lord Baltimore was, and he's like, tell you what, I'll give you a colony. You can take your Catholics out of England and take them to Maryland, okay? I think Disneyland, Maryland, okay, Roman Catholics is Maryland. It only lasts a certain amount of time before Protestants kind of take it over, but still, it's a colony for Roman Catholics. North of Virginia. The Carolinas, all I'll tell you there is Charles II was king, and he basically just gave the Carolinas to some noblemen who helped his kingdom. He had been displaced from the throne, needed to take it back. They helped him, so he's like, oh, here's land that I don't really own, but I'll give to you anyway. And they took it. And it quickly divides into North and South Carolina. And there's a lot we could learn about that, but I don't think it's practical for you to know it. So North and South Carolina come out as well as proprietary colony. Oops. Pennsylvania you read a ton about for the last test, or you didn't and didn't do very well on the test, but who started Pennsylvania?
William Penn.
William Penn, good. What religion was he?
He was
Quaker, okay. So Pennsylvania started basically as a haven for Quakers. Their name for themselves was the Society of Friends. Everyone, I think that's funny. Everyone else called them Quakers. It was started by a guy named George Fox. I like George Fox a ton. I like the early Quakers a ton in terms of their belief in Christ. Basically, they had no hierarchy, no pastor. So when they met in their meeting house, they would sing songs and worship God. Then they'd sit and wait for the Holy Spirit to lead someone to give a message.
That's so cool.
It's pretty cool. People made fun of them and called them Quakers because they said they were shaking in their seats waiting for God to come upon them. So they're actually making fun of them by calling them Quakers, but they kind of embrace the name. Today, there are Quakers. There's a very liberal branch that doesn't really believe the scriptures much anymore, or that Jesus died for their sins. And there's a more conservative branch that does.
I mean, I'm sure that there's some of that's kind of roped into Christian religion.
Yes. So you don't have to pack up yet. Hold on, let me finish this one. So, they're both pacifists, regardless, which you read about. But it started by a guy named William Penn, and what he promoted was religious freedom, just like Rhode Island. Now we're going to get our second colony with religious freedom, and it prospers and does really well because Penn sent out advertisements, pamphlets, letters, encouraging people to come for religious freedom. And so Philadelphia will grow quickly, soon rival Boston in its size, and Pennsylvania will be a very successful colony. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll finish up these notes, not too many, then we'll get you started on your primary source reading.